A few months ago, on a calm, damp summer night, I woke up to someone shouting my name. Daniel, Daniel, are you there? Open the door. I was just in my underwear, but sweat was forming on my forehead as I reached to check the time on my phone. I woke up in an unfamiliar bed, in an unfamiliar room. What was happening? Was this a bad dream? In fact, I was in one of the tiniest villages of Hungary and about to let in Mr. M, who had a pack of beers with him and soon shared his fear with me. After having a fight at home, his family threatened to call the police, and he worried he might hurt someone. Being quick-tempered, he stabbed a boxer when he was 19, spending 8 years of his life in prison as a result. And that was only his first time behind the bars. So how did I end up in this village? Why was I listening to his story? In December 2018, almost 2 years ago, I was in a deep ditch. On the verge of a breakup, without a fixed income, I decided to run forward. Instead of running away from the issues, to look life into its eye and to challenge myself. At that point, I decided to challenge myself in new ways by photographing my own country, my own villages. Instead of traveling to exotic locations abroad, to turn the camera inwards, to get to know where I grew up as a child, where I am coming from. More specifically, I began exploring the smallest villages scattered around the country. Did you know that currently 1.5 million people in Hungary live in a village where there is no grocery store, and in many cases, not even a school, a pub, or a church? In these places, it is still in fashion to sit in front of the house and look at the little that is happening. There are no job opportunities and barely any entertainment options. Often, the only person connecting to the outside world is the mobile grocery salesman. In East Central Europe, rural life practically collapsed after 1989 with the dissolution of the collective farms, the influx of agricultural products from the West, and finally, the integration into the European Union. In Hungary, the rural is especially on the periphery. One city, Budapest, is accountable for over 39% of the national income. Immersing myself into the topic made me more aware that in recent decades, an increasing percentage of the world's population lives in cities, and the rural areas are depopulating. In a currently running exhibition at the Guggenheim, the Dutch architect Rem Koolhaas explains that according to forecasts, by 2030, 2/3 of humanity will be living in cities on just 3% of the Earth's land. For us, this means that the remaining people in the countryside will be responsible for the cultivation of 97% of the territory. This project is about those people. During the past 2 years, I have traveled over 14,000 kilometers by train, bus, car, and on foot, visiting over 70 of the tiniest villages scattered around Hungary, settlements with a population below 100. My interest in these aspects of life became an urge to move my eyes into the Hungarian periphery, using the camera as a microscope, documenting people, the built environment, objects, and landscapes. To experience being in the periphery, I chose to travel to the locations by every means possible. Walking on foot across the fields and forests from neighboring villages, taking a train, or taking the one single bus that transports people each day. After the first month, I decided to buy a 20-year-old car to be able to work more on this project. I have to be honest and confess that this new approach was initially scary. It was scary not knowing where this process will take me, not knowing exactly what I'm looking for, not having every image in my head before taking out my medium format camera, but instead letting it take me to new locations. Allowing myself not to create well-defined answers, but to ask questions about the rural state of being where I grew up as a child, but that I have since forgotten. Within the first few months, to my initial astonishment, the work received the praise of curators and fellow photographers at portfolio reviews, and I became one of the 3 Capa Grand Prize 2020 nominees. Simultaneously, I was admitted to the doctorate program of the Molina University of Art and Design, where my focus in the first year was to gather literature on research methodologies on the social and geographic peripheries. Despite the positive feedback, there were numerous moments when I doubted myself, when things didn't go smoothly, when people didn't want to be photographed, or when the lockdown prevented me from traveling for a few weeks in March, initiating new thoughts about my position in the rural-urban divide. The pandemic seems to overthrow the prognosis mentioned before by making the countryside a desirable option again. People are re-evaluating their urban condition. However, instead of a complete reversal, another approach to look at is to make new connections between the rural and the urban condition. By documenting the tiniest villages dispersed around Hungary, while also exploring the borders of Budapest in another parallel photo project, I seek to define the spectrum and to point out the dichotomy between the big city and the melting away settlements of the country that have lost their purpose. As I felt it is important to capture this moment, I started the village project at the end of 2018. To achieve my goal, I created a list of the villages and put them on a map to be explored over the following years as a kind of therapeutic autoethnographic journey. I used artistic research methods and immersed myself into the academic literature and the rural environment as much as possible, while still maintaining the benefits of being an outsider, to be able to use documentary photographic tools to portray the topic. The choice to focus on the tiniest villages was made to be able to investigate a diverse set of settlements in various regions of the country with a varied population matrix. There are a little over 100 such villages, as evidenced by the official Bureau of Statistics data. Some are close to the national border, others to bigger towns. Some are Catholic, others Orthodox or Protestant. Even more importantly, being a stranger in such a place is immediately apparent to the inhabitants. On one hand, this might cause unwanted attention, but it also triggers a psychological reaction. Especially in the absence of religious services and being physically remote, a stranger quickly becomes like a priest who they can confess to share stories with, like Mr. M did. If I stay too long, I lose this ability, so it was crucial to keep this balance of being a stranger near enough to understand, but far enough to be free to talk to. This privilege is only possible by sharing the same native language in such remote settlements. While most are eager to share their stories and were happy to talk to someone about their joys and struggles, I also noticed the pattern that some people in the most economically dire situations often were not willing to talk out of suspicion and out of fear of losing their jobs for speaking up. The fact is that after the fall of socialism and the collapse of the state farming unions, there is almost zero working opportunity left for villagers. In such settlements, the only hope for employment comes in the form of a government program intended to replace social benefits with a social work opportunity, paying a meager 140 euros each month. The catch is that even this opportunity is only given to a select few in each village and is decided by the mayor, who, like a modern-day nobleman, decides over such matters. Here, let me take you on a detour and talk about some of the images that are part of the related project where I walked the roughly 150-kilometer municipal border of the capital city, Budapest. The photographs show the edge of the city, the liminal, fictional border that divides it from the countryside. In recent years, there has been an increasing emphasis on geographical boundaries as static formations, as structures that are symbols of permanence. In practice, a boundary is usually an extensive zone, a zone that separates and connects at the same time. It is important to emphasize that boundaries exist not only in the physical space presented so far, but also overlapping with it in the mental space between us. In addition to the well-known political and administrative boundaries, we can also talk about social, cultural, ethnic, and other mental borders. These are symbolic boundaries that shape our actions when crossing the frontier. In the past 2 years, visiting villages, walking the edge of the city, and doing research for my doctorate, I have realized what this really is about for me and where I want to take the research in the coming years. It is about being a stranger, an outsider in a new environment. Let me illustrate this thought with a quote from the German sociologist philosopher Georg Simmel. A stranger is not a wanderer who may come today and leave tomorrow. He comes today and stays. He is a potential wanderer. He remains within a specific place, but he has not always belonged to it, and so he carries into it qualities that could not belong there. The stranger is a paradox. He is here, close at hand, but his having recently been far away is also present to us. The experience of feeling like an outsider, the impression of being unique in a new environment, is at the core of my artistic practice. My goal is to analyze the psychological and social implications of entering new circumstances by employing a phenomenological framework. I want to answer the question of how we can relate to a person with whom we share no past, a query that is increasingly relevant today. Investigating the figure of the stranger from geographical, social, and mental perspectives, the artistic research creates a database of images, texts, and best practices for strangers. In the past months, in the past years, we have constantly faced new challenges that made us reconsider our usual ways of thinking. Migration, climate change, post-truth, Me Too, the global pandemic, the decline of democracy. In these times of uncertainty, many choose to retreat to a safe space, to build physical and mental barriers, to return to tried and tested methods. As a final note, closing the presentation, I'm going to leave you with 3 questions. How would we imagine our life living in a different rhythm, a different reality of limited possibilities? How do mental borders define our ways of thinking? How is the built environment around us affecting our life, our well-being? Thank you for your attention.